weeks ago, we had Jessica Rosenworcel, Commissioner on the FCC, who was a Democratic appointee. To balance things up now, we have Ajit Pai, another FCC Commissioner, this time a Republican appointee. Ajit Pai, Commissioner Pai, can I call you Ajit?
Oh, you can call me whatever you like.
Well, within reason.
I prefer that four-letter word, though, I've got to say.
Well, Ajit, real honor to have you on Innovate 2016. Let's talk politics.
Sure.
This is a show about politics. Does it make much difference whether you're a Republican or a Democratic appointee? How does that work?
Historically, it hasn't. Communications policy has been a bipartisan affair for the most part. And going back to the Clinton administration, for example, there was a bipartisan consensus between President Clinton and a Republican Congress that the internet, which was then in its infancy, should be lightly regulated. And that was a consensus that gave us the internet economy that is now the envy of the world. So that's certainly the spirit that I bring to the job.
But do most of the votes turn into Democrat versus Republican, or do people vote fairly independently of party?
The vast majority of our votes are unanimous. We try to reach consensus wherever possible. Unfortunately, there's a narrow segment of issues, very high-profile issues, where recently it's become more politicized. And that, I think, is unfortunate, both for the Commission, obviously, where I serve, but largely for the American public.
Which are those issues?
For example, net neutrality, that's a big one.
Your favorite issue, of course.
Exactly right.
Every time you mention that word, you get zapped.
Yeah, exactly right. So, but when I travel across the country, I think virtually everybody wants better, faster, cheaper internet, and that's certainly where I would prefer the FCC spend its time.
Do you expect network neutrality to become an issue in the 2016 presidential election?
It wouldn't surprise me if it were. This is an issue that increasingly is capturing Americans' attention. We rely on the internet more every day. Seems like, especially among the young, mobile phones and other internet-based applications are surgically attached to us, and so that's one of the reasons why people really pay attention to what role the government is going to play in the digital world.
Do you think it would be fair to say, though, that this issue has been blown out of proportion and that it's been in many ways misrepresented?
I think what is fair to say is that it has been a giant distraction, that the internet economy in the United States is not malfunctioning. To the contrary, the fact that we have dramatic entrepreneurship in this country that's unparalleled elsewhere suggests that we do have a good broadband ecosystem. What we do need, however, is to focus on greater broadband deployment. What I've talked about, for example, is ubiquitous broadband. So whether you're a consumer standing in the middle of San Francisco or an Alaska native sitting in a village above the Arctic Circle, you should get the same digital opportunities. And that's something the FCC does have a role in advancing.
Ajit, what might this Title II legislation mean for entrepreneurs?
I think it could mean, first and foremost, that we put in jeopardy the broadband infrastructure we've got. I've heard from providers.
Jeopardy?
I think it could, and so I think if you look over the long term, Europe, for example, has embraced the utility-style model that we just adopted. Broadband investment in Europe is a fraction of what it is here, especially on the wireless side, and that's something that I don't want to see happen. Additionally, there is a worry that given the nature of the FCC's decision, eventually these regulations could apply to so-called edge providers, to the Facebooks, the Netflixes, the Googles of the world. And that's something that would, I think, unfortunately inhibit innovation and investment in some of these great ideas that we see on the web.
So what you're saying is entrepreneurs should be concerned about Title II. Many actually see it as ensuring an open internet.
Well, I think all of us favor an open internet. The question
whatever
is,
that means.
Right. The question is, how do you get there?
Being against apple pie, right?
Exactly right, and cowboys and baseball and the rest. But I think what we have to be worried about, however, is an activist agency creating a problem where there isn't one. So, for example, recently the agency has cited Lyft for potential privacy violations. Lyft obviously is not has not been regulated by the FCC. But nonetheless, the agency is now looking at other players in the internet ecosystem and saying, well, what are their business practices? Should we bring them in to justify them, and should we consider sanctioning them? And I think that's where we are going to see the rubber meet the road when it comes to the internet.
Ajit, what other issues do you think that the candidates should be debating when it comes to digital policy? I mean, some of these aren't exactly sexy, but spectrum, for example?
Absolutely. To me, the greatest question, and I know I'm biased given my vantage point, but the greatest question for America in the 21st century is, do we want to make digital opportunity available to every American? And if we do, and if we're serious about it, and if we adopt policies to secure that, there's no telling what kind of benefits there could be for the American economy, and not just the macro ones, job creation, economic growth, all the rest, but also sort of on a micro level. It shouldn't matter where you live, what your family background is, what your income is. If you've got a good idea and a broadband connection, that idea should be able to find expression in the 21st century. And that's what I've seen it for myself everywhere from Savannah, Georgia to Fargo, North Dakota, that there are entrepreneurs out there trying to build a culture that would eventually, I would hope, would rival anything you would find on the coast. And that's something that would make America a lot stronger.
Ajit, I live in Santa Rosa, California, which is hardly the sticks, but I'm desperate for a fiber connection.
Yeah.
How does that need, and we all have the same need for faster internet connection, how does that connect with policy and the work you do and some of the conversations that the candidates will have in 2016?
It's a great question. I think all of us want more options, faster speeds, and that's one of the things that we confront every single day. For example, on the telephone side, one of the things that I've been struggling to get removed from our books is these legacy regulations that require telephone companies to maintain their copper plant. And what they told us is, look, every dollar we spend maintaining this copper infrastructure is by definition a dollar that we cannot spend deploying fiber. Same thing on the wireless side. There are a lot of wireless internet service providers, for example, who say we would really love to get more wireless spectrum into the marketplace so that we can deliver gigabit connectivity wirelessly and provide an alternative to the cable and the telephone companies. These are the kinds of policies.
Who are the bad guys here? Is it the cable, the telephone companies? Is it the TV companies who still own the spectrum? What needs to happen?
I think part of it is that the FCC needs greater authority, and that's something that Congress
More
can
authority for you guys?
Well, limited authority, for example, to open up new vistas for spectrum. So, for example, when it comes to a certain spectrum that's currently held by federal agencies, other than the private sector, that's where the FCC could use a little bit of a boost from Congress. But there's a lot that we can do on our own. For example, making it a lot easier for companies to attach internet infrastructure to poles and underground. That would be something that would be very helpful. A so-called dig once policy, so that you don't have to get a permit every single time you want to dig up a road. These are the kinds of things that would give all the players in the private sector the maximum incentive to deploy.
But what you're saying then is that for America to become a truly innovative economy and to compete in the digital economy against China, against Israel, these things have to be gotten right, whether it's spectrum or network neutrality. These are important issues. They're not just technicalities. They're not just for the geeks.
Absolutely right, and I think that's one piece of it, the so-called physical layer, I guess you might say, the infrastructure piece. The other piece is the innovation that rides over that network, and we have to be very careful that we don't apply 20th century regulations to this 21st century economy, and that means everything from yesteryear's labor regulations applied to Uber, to yesteryear's hotel regulations applied to Airbnb, to other legacy regulations that are applied to innovators. I recently spent a few days in the Bay Area, and it was striking across these industries how consistently I heard the message, we don't want Washington to try to fit the square peg of innovation into this round hole of 20th century regulation. And that's something that I think lawmakers and policymakers should be mindful of.
Finally, Ajit, Jessica Rosenworcel, I know, like yourself, spends a lot of time in the Bay Area. How can you, as a commissioner, as a member of the Washington, D.C. political elite, how can you make Silicon Valley more part of the conversation? How can you empower our innovation more broadly in America?
That's a great question, and I've been struck over the last 3.5 years that I've been on the FCC that there does seem to be this geographic, cultural, you name it, divide between us. But I think the crucial thing, is for the FCC, first and foremost, to be there, to visit the Bay Area, to understand some of the challenges that the Bay Area entrepreneurs are facing, and that's part of the reason why I was there the last couple of days. Part of it involves Silicon Valley coming to Washington, or at least understanding that agencies don't move at digital speed. Unfortunately, we have a lot of rules, regulations, policies, and other restraints on our ability to act quickly. We're trying to improve that, but nonetheless, we are somewhat limited in what we're able to do.
Well, Ajit Pai, Commissioner of the FCC, I think you are beginning to move with digital speed, and I look forward to that speed increasing and for you to become more and more involved in not only Washington, D.C. politics, but the politics and culture of Silicon Valley. Real honor to have you on Innovate 2016, and you're always very welcome to come back on in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The pleasure is mine. The pleasure is mine.